Okay, good. So it's 1 p.m. So it's time to start the webinar today, especially because we have a very tight program today. I would like to start on time. So welcome everyone to today's webinar, where we will discuss about international standards for e-waste recycling. And I'm very happy to have with us speakers from the three main standards focusing on electronic waste management. So in today's webinar, we will discuss about the three standards. They will be presented, will be introduced to you, and also discuss about how those standards can be implemented in developing countries, especially because we have always a challenge of getting facilities certified in developing countries, especially because, of course, funding might also be an issue. So we will have the chance to discuss how we can implement those international standards also in developing countries, because standards are very important to enable proper recycling, especially also when you connect on the international market. But this will also be presented and tackled by the different speakers. So if we look again quickly at the program for today's webinar, so in the beginning, I'm in the middle of the introduction, and after that I will hand over to Lucia Herreras from WeForum and Paula Costa from WheelerBags. They will introduce the Senelec standard, which is focusing mainly, or is a European standard. They will give you an in-depth introduction into that standard. Then we have Jim Bucket with us, who is working for the BAN organization and is leading also, or BAN is hosting the EastRUET standard. I guess most of you have heard his name already. He's came up in a lot of publications already, so his name is very known. And then the third presentation will be about the R2 standard, which is also an American-based standard. And the host organization of this standard is SERI, so the Sustainable Electronics Recycling Institute, and Jean de Vries will introduce to you the R2 standard. At the end of the webinar, we will still have time to discuss, have some questions. So we will have, after each presentation, a few minutes a few minutes for some burning questions, and then at the end we will have some more time for proper discussion and and asking the speakers some more detailed question. I will record the webinar and also share the slides with you after this webinar as usual. You are all muted, so please also keep it that way. And in the discussion, then, if you want to speak up or if you have questions after each presentation, just be reminded that you unmute your microphone before you ask your question. So with that, I would like to hand over to Lucia and Paula. I will now stop sharing my screen so you can take over and start the presentation.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I hope that I'm not muted and you can hear me well. And thank you for counting with us for this presentation. So we'll do a combined presentation between WeForum and WheelerBags. We didn't have time for rehearsal, but I hope the duet will work well. So thank you, Paula. Can you? Yes, thank you. I am Lucia, the technical manager of the WeForum. We are an association of e-waste extended responsibility organizations, what we usually call PROs or systems. We have around 40 members around the world in different countries. Most of our members are based in Europe. And our main activity is to act as a competence center to help our members to succeed as PROs. Paula, would you like to introduce the WheelerBags?
Yes, of course. Good morning to all. My name is Paula Costa. I'm the development manager of Willabex organization. Willabex organization is an accredited body, was born on a project launched by WeForum some years ago, and the Take Back schemes. Now it's an organization, an individual organization that is accredited for providing the certification of auditors and also we treatment operators according with the norms ISO 70065 and ISO 70024. Both norms give us the power to be accredited to provide this certification. We have at the moment more than 184 certified treatment sites listed. You can you can know them in our website, and also we have about 74 auditors certified. So, Lucia, I will pass again to you.
Thank you. So today we'll provide a brief introduction about the CENELEC standards. We will start with a couple of minutes explaining why these standards were developed and how. Then we will provide some practical information for those that are considering implementing the standards, like where the standards and the general requirements that are included in the general treatment standard. And then we'll continue with some let's say, information on the benefits of implementing the standard and how to find training activities if you are interested in following some training about CENELEC. Thank you very much. So I thought it was important to explain why CENELEC standards are important and why they were developed. So in 2002, there was the publication of the European Directive on e-waste. And in fact, this directive was allocating financing responsibility for the collection, the treatment, and the disposal of e-waste to the producers, the manufacturers of the electric and electronic appliances. And at the same time, you can hear. Still good?
Lucia,
Hello?
yeah, for me it's okay. I can hear you, Lucia. Lucia?
Okay, thank you. It's just that I got some. Okay, yeah, I also can hear someone typing on the background.
I think it was Nico. I just muted him again, so there he unmuted himself. I think there was.
Okay, thank you.
I think you can go on.
Okay, sorry. So it's probably not my connection then. Okay, thank you. So as I was explaining this, the directive that we usually call the WE directive was also setting recycling and recovery targets for e-waste. So given this, we needed some proper and harmonized e-waste treatment practices because there were no technical guidelines to help treatment operators to understand exactly how to properly depollute and handle e-waste. Not all treatment operators, let's say, because there was already a treatment industry in Europe before the WE directive. And we also needed some common harmonized evaluation criteria for checking that the requirements were met. Next slide, thank you. So in 2009, the WE Forum requested some funding to the European Commission and the had created or produced a set of standards dealing with collection, logistics, and treatment of e-waste. And at the same time, it produced or established a conformity verification process, meaning an auditing process and a pool of auditors. And so, in fact, the WILAVEX organization was one of the main outcomes of this project, and is now, as Paula was saying, an independent organization dealing with the certification of auditors and treatment operators. So at the same time, in 2014, so after the WILAVEX standards were developed, the European Commission asked CENELEC, which is, I'm sure that you all know CENELEC. So they asked CENELEC to develop a set of standards on treatment, because there is an article in the WI Directive that is asking for this, for setting some minimum quality treatment requirements. And so we thought, okay, we have the WILAVEX standards already here. Why not using them to help CENELEC develop their own standards? So WILAVEX standards were used as a starting point for writing CENELEC standards, so the 5625 series as we know them. And then we Forum agreed that in order to avoid conflicting requirements between WILAVEX and CENELEC, that once the CENELEC standards were published and out and ready to be used, if these were equivalent to WILAVEX requirements, then we will drop the WILAVEX standard requirements, and we will use CENELEC requirements from that point on. And this is exactly what happened within the WILAVEX organization. So they are currently auditing against the CENELEC standards. So I hope this was clear, because I think there is a lot of confusion between CENELEC and WILAVEX, and otherwise, of course, I guess there will be some time for questions after that. So thanks, Paul. Slide. Okay, thank you. So you can see here a list of the different standards that documents that were developed by CENELEC. As you can see in bold, I highlighted, let's say, in a way, what we call the standards, just with this generic term. And as you can see, there is a general treatment document that is applicable to all WI. And then we have some specific documents that are addressing specific types of WI that have particular treatment requirements. So we have a standard for lamps, another one for displays, including cathode ray tubes and flat screens. We have another document with requirements, containing requirements for cooling and freezing equipment, and another one for photovoltaic panels. And you can see at the same time that there is another set of documents that they all end up with technical specification that mirror the ones above. So next to the general treatment requirements standard, we can find a general technical specification. And it happens the same with lamps. There is also a lamps technical specification and so on. At the same time, we have 3 other documents that were developed by CENELEC. One has to do with preparing for reuse practices. So it's addressed for operators that are dealing with preparing for reuse. There is another document. One final document that is dealing with end processing of fractions that contain precious metals. That is the last one on the list. Thank you, Paula. So just as a very brief explanation, the standards documents, as we usually refer to them, the ones that usually start with EN 5625, are the ones that provide the general guidelines, the general requirements for treatment operators. Usually these documents need a higher consensus within the CENELEC organization for being approved and published. And these are they have a revision period of 5 years. It may happen that after these 5 years, the document is revised or is decided to leave it as it is, which is what currently happens with the general treatment standard. The technical specifications, however, they provide some support to the standards. So they are usually shorter documents that provide technical details, like, for example, sampling protocols or analysis methodologies or limit values. So let's say, for example, the standard would say that you need to remove all the mercury from the lamps, and the technical specification will tell you, will provide a limit value, will provide a methodology so you can measure the mercury removed in a harmonized way. So this is how also updated to the technical, let's say, evolution of the market. So, Paula, can you move to the next slide? Thank you. So where can you find the standards? So you need to buy them. It's the rule is similar to the ISO 14000 or the ISO 9000. You need to buy them, and you can buy them at the e-shops of the CENELEC national committees. I added there the links in case you are looking for them. And just a tip, there is quite a difference in the cost of the standard. So we usually recommend that you buy them at the Estonian e-shop, because you can buy a paper copy in English by less than 20 euro. Thank you. And then I will I will give the floor to Paula then.
Okay, thank you very much, Lucia, for the slides. So, as I mentioned in the beginning, we are a certification body accredited to certified operators according with the CENELEC standard. And the scope of this certification, from the point of view of the treatment operators, are the waste treatment operators. We also certified collection and logistic facility. Is not under our accreditation. We are hoping to put also collection and logistic facilities under our accreditation, but for now, the accreditation is for the treatment operators of the waste. So what kind of requirements are we checking during our audit? So the requirements are, as Lucia told, CENELEC. So all the requirements that are in the CENELEC are covered by our audits. So issues related with environmental management systems and risk management, like legal obligations, authorizations, the procedures to maintain and to access the legal requirements, all the health and safety aspects, risk assessments, protective measures, the need of continuous improvement, the need to have an insurance or other financial resource in place to cover the risk are covered in this big hat of environmental management. Okay. Also, issues related with requirements for handling and storage, things like weatherproof covering, impermeable surface, labeling, etc. And the pollution requirements and monitoring of this depollution performance, of course, very important. I'm going to speak after more about this, but only to give you an overview what we check in the audit. So also, we include the verification of the detailed process requirements for each particular type of WEEE. So each particular type of WEEE have specific requirements. This was the reason why Lucia was explaining that we have the standard and then we have the technical specification. So when we do these audits, if we are doing an audit to the large appliance, of course, we need to cover not only the main standard, but also the technical specification. There is a verification of the recycling and recovering rates, and the verification of the traceability and documentation of the material flows, including the export of material. So all the requirements are aligned with Senelec standard. There is no longer a WILABEX document. There is the requirements of the Senelec standard that needs to be fulfilled. How do we do this audit? We call it a conformity verification process. All start with a document called Declaration of Intent. The declaration of intent is submitted by the treatment operator with some important information that specifies what kind of stream are they treating, what kind of what type of treatment are they doing, quantities, information about the the flow of the treatment. So all the information that we need to understand the dimension and the specific issues related with the treatment operator. I saw that we have one person wants to make a question, but perhaps we can put the questions at the end, so it's more easy to manage this. And then the declaration of intent is submitted to the organization of WILABEX and to the auditor. The auditor makes an audit plan, and of course there is a document where the operator sign and agrees with the rules that are established that need to be fulfilled for the conformity verification process. So the audit is performed. The duration of the audit depends of the number of streams and the quantities that and the type of the treatment that the operator is dealing. This is established in a document, so all the auditors know the rules that establish the duration of the audit, and then the auditor goes to the treatment facility and perform the audit. At the end, there is a document that is signed by both. It's called audit statement, where both auditor and treatment operator sign that the audit was done, what was the conditions of the audit, and there is another documents that are issued, like the audit report, and also the validation of the batch report, and if it is a cooling or freezing audit, must be a specialist report at the end. All is summarized in part 1 and part 2 of the audit. So how long does it take? We are on the site. The auditor makes an audit report draft to only to send to the operator for them to check if there is any specific issue related with the information of the treatment operator that needs to be corrected. Not, of course, the evaluation of the auditor, but only things related like number of license or other things. And then the auditor makes the final report. If there is non-conformities or missing data, these can stop for a maximum 6 months, but otherwise they need to correct all the non-conformities that are priority 1 in a deadline that is also established. If everything is okay, then we can recommend the treatment operator to be listed. Okay, so let's carry on. So to refresh, what is the main goals of the standards? The main goals of the standards and the audits is to check the depollution, the recycling and recovering rates, the safety and the emergency, check if the process is under control, and also legal compliance. So these are the 5 main goals subject to the standards and the audits. We spoke until now about the standard, so collection and logistic and treatment requirements for we are specified in the standard 50,625 part 1. And in this document, all the requirements are organized. They are organized first in administrative and organizational requirements, then in technical requirements. The third one is documentation. So all the documents that the treatment operators must keep and give this evidence of documents to during the proof that everything is covered, and then the annex that specifies some specific information. In administrative and organizational requirements, we can see things related with the management principles, technical and infrastructural preconditions, training, monitoring, and shipment. So, management principles, as I specified in the beginning, management principles equivalent to the requirements of the management systems in the fields of health and safety, environment, and quality. Technical and infrastructural preconditions. Here are all the things related with the infrastructure in terms of size, technology installed, and characteristics to perform the operation. So these must be suitable with the activities performed on the site. And to assess these, the treatment operators must identify the hazard and assess the risk and to check if they are appropriate to eliminate or reduce the risk. And these must be documented in the and how do they do it and how do they manage all this. So this also includes control of access and ingress from the sites, weather-proof covering requirements, and other issues. Training. Training includes not only things related with safety issues like emergency and training to provide to the workers related with risk assessment, so occupation and health and safety, but also training to perform the relevant operations on site. So it is very important that the treatment operators have workers that know what they are doing, how to depollute the waste. And the monitoring. The treatment operator needs to record the origin of each consign of we accepted at the treatment facility. The treatment operator shall record the downstream treatment of E and fractions, therefore, until the end of waste status is reached or until the WE is prepared for use, recycled, recovered, or disposal. So downstream monitoring is very important. We need to know if the next acceptor have the license, have the proper technology, if they are fulfilling the requirements or not. So monitoring is very important. Shipments. The need to ensure that shipments of WE or fractions therefore are treated according with the Senelec standard, but also according with the law. So these cover the first part. The second part of the standard is technical requirements, and this includes, some general information and then things specific related with the receiving of WE at the treatment facility, handling of WE, storage of WE prior to treatment, depollution, how to monitoring the depollution, treatment of non-depolluted WE and fractions, storage of fractions, recycling and recovering targets, and recovering and disposal of fractions. So let's have a look of some examples. So examples of the treatment requirements that are specified in the standard. So we shall be handled and stored with due care in order to avoid release of hazard substance into the air, water, or soil as a result of damage or leakage. So you can see in the top, these four pictures are good examples. So in the first one, the workers are handling the cooling and freezing equipment with careful, correct. The second one, you have a correct storage of flat panel disposal. In the third one, you have also a good example how to storage the cooling and freezing equipment. And the last one is how to handle and store flat panel displays. But in the second line, we have bad examples. So it's not allowed to do uncontrolled shipping. So it's not allowed to receive a load of we and at the facility and uncontrolled shipping to the floor. Also, the second one is a good example that things that cannot be done related with handling the we. And the last one is also a bad example, because if you handle this cooling and freezing like this, you crush the cooling and freezing circuit, and then you are not fulfilling the requirement to avoid the release of hazardous substance. So other technical requirements that are in the standard are related with the need to wait and record each delivery, to the need to separate the we from non-we and wait and record the part that is we. So the handling, as I explained before, and the storage of fractions need to avoid dispersal of hazard substance to the environment, and need to avoid to warm to warm the workers and other people. Also, the things related with depollution. So depollution is mainly the need to remove substance and preparations that are specified not only in the directive but in the standard. And these substance and preparations are capacitors containing PCBs, electrolyte or oil, components containing mercury, batteries and accumulators, printed circuit boards, toner cartridge, plastics with barbonate flame retardants, asbestos, cathode ray tubes, volatile fluorocarbons and volatile hydrocarbons, gas discharge lamps, liquid crystal displays, external electrical cables, components containing refractory ceramic fibers, components containing radioactive substance. But it's not only important to depollute, but it's very important to check if your depollution is completed and you are fulfilling the requirements that needs to be fulfilled. So the standard also specified that we need to monitoring. So monitoring is to check if you are removing all the substance and from the and preparations that need to be removed. And in the standard, we can find, in the technical specifications, we can find that these can be checked by quantification, because there is a defined number that you need to reach, or by mass balance, or by analysis. In some kinds of streams, you can or you need to use more than one method to check this monitoring depollution. Also, the determination of recycling and recovering rates at an annual basis per treatment stream. This is very well specified in Annex C of the standard. And then you have all the annex in the standard that gives guidelines regarding the pollution monitoring, how to determine the recycling and recovering rates, the requirements concerning the performing of the batch, the materials and components of we requiring selective treatment, the documentation for downstream monitoring, and recovering rate. So the benefits of compliance. We have no doubts of the benefits, but we want to highlight that the benefits are related with the compliance of the legislation. Be prepared for inspection by authorities. So if you are fulfilling, you have no fears. You can demonstrate that you are complying according with the law, give you a competitive advantage compared to the other operators, better preparedness for upcoming strict European legislation. Now in Europe, now with this scenario, this new scenario, I think everything is a little bit stopped, but it was on discussion the possibility of an implementation act uh, to demand related with the Senelec standards, demanding some issues to be mandatory. So better prepare for the oncoming strict European legislation. Accurate and detailed information about fill ratios of output fractions, better depollution, accurate information about recycling and recovering rates. If all the treatment operators are following the same rule, we will have no doubt about the accurate of this information. An improvement for health and safety issues, because there is requirements very strict related with risk assessment, emergency preparedness, cooperation with compliance schemes, very important. The schemes in the WILABEX organization will work only with certified WILABEX operators, and improve the confidence for a circular economy that we are listening every day. So equivalent treatment conditions outside. So this is line with Article 10 of the WE directive, and of course this Article 10 specified that we exported out of Union shall only count towards the fulfillment of obligations and targets set in Article 11 of this directive in compliance with the regulation. The exporter can prove that treatment took place in conditions that are equivalent to the requirements of this directive. So this is very important, that there are equivalent treatment conditions. A last information that I want to give is that WILABEX is not only a certification body, but most of all is a competence center on weed treatment. We are proud to have a group of experts that support WILABEX organization. So we are able to provide training activities for auditors and waste treatment operators or others that are interested in increase the knowledge about the Senelec. So most of the trainings are provided by webinar, very important nowadays. And you can find information in our webpage. I put the address here, but for your knowledge, we can provide tailor-made webinars, trainings, so according with your needs, but also we have already some webinars developed. The last one was a set of 6 models of webinars that were related with the Senelec standard. So this set of webinars were designed thinking to understand the button things like vocabulary and go to more specific and things like sampling and analysis. So there is an increase of knowledge when you do these 6 models. Also, it's important for you to know that WILABEX is not only working inside Europe, WILABEX is working outside Europe also, trying to cooperate with the countries that have interest in the understand and in do better in improvement the competence. So we already developed some actions in countries like Australia, India, Kazakhstan, Russia, Belarus, Ukraine, Egypt, Colombia, and Brazil. So you have information here about what are we doing. I'm not going to specify by country because I think I'm almost without time. And thank you for all your attention. This is all that we prepare for you today.
Thank you, Paula and Lucia. So before we go to the next presentation, is there any burning question that you would like to address now to the two? Checking if there's someone that has a burning question. Doesn't seem like it. So I would like to hand over to Jim Bucket now. So your screen is coming up. I think you're still on mute because we cannot hear you yet, Jim.
Now.
Yes, now it's good. We can hear you clearly.
And you see my screen?
See your screen. Perfect.
Okay, very good. Good afternoon. It's good morning for me, if you can believe it. I'm over here on the west coast of the US. And thank you for joining us in these very challenging times to talk about e-waste. Today I'm going to go through three sections. I'm going to introduce e-stewards, which is our standard. Then we'll talk about the latest version of it, which, because it's brand new, version 4.0. And then I'm going to highlight two of our special programs for you. So getting right into how we started and why we started and why we created this. BAN as an organization, the Basel Action Network, is focused on toxic trade. And we began discovering some years ago, back in 2002 exactly, that so much of the waste was being exported, principally from North America, Europe, Australia, Japan, to places like China and in Africa. And we did two seminal reports at that time, one of them called Exporting Harm, the other one called The Digital Dump, which was similar, but focused on what we discovered in Nigeria at that time. And reporting on this not only came from BAN, but following BAN, a lot of journalists made similar discoveries. And in the United States, it became a very hot issue when a major network, CBS, and their news magazine, 60 Minutes, did an episode in 2008 following me going to Hong Kong and China to show what happened to American e-waste. It was quite a shock to the system and to the body politic. The US EPA, therefore, our Environmental Protection Agency in the United States, convened a stakeholders meeting saying, what should we do? We seem to have things pretty out of control. Things are not looking good for the electronic waste issue. What should we do? And that meeting decided we needed a set of standards. We need some kind of best practices. And as a result of that, which BAN worked on diligently for several years, was R2, the responsible recycling set of best practices. We worked really hard on that, but at the end of the day, it was very unacceptable to the environmental groups that were part of the working group that the standard ignored the Basel Convention, the Basel Ban Amendment, etc. So the rules of the road for trade, very important in this issue of e-waste, were really forgotten. And this was a big issue for us, of course, and many of our corporate allies said, you're going to have to create your own standard, which is what we did. So the Basel Convention is very important to us and to most of the countries of the world, but not to the United States, which is still a non-party. It was adopted in 1989, and the Ban Amendment was adopted in 1995, which forbids all the export of any kind of hazardous waste from developed to developing countries. That ban amendment now is more timely than ever, of course, because it entered into force in December of last year. So now that has become the law of the land. It's international law and needs to be respected. So e-stewards, getting back to what happened in the United States, was really a response to R2, and was born out of R2 and the need to be more globally responsible than R2. So that was why we began, and we knew that when we started, we would need to have not only the supply of responsible recyclers, but we would need to have demand for them as well. So we launched with certified recyclers, and we launched with enterprise companies and institutions and cities that stated that they would always prefer those e-Steward certified recyclers. So we have the supply and demand at the same time being put forward in our launch. The mission of e-Stewards on paper says that e-Stewards defines and promotes best practices for ethical and responsible electronics reuse and recycling worldwide. Very simple. But the way we like to think of e-Stewards and our ethic and our mission is based on these three words. It's all about being ethical, being accountable, and being responsive to the industry and to the times. So we like to think of this as the ear concept, and an ear is what you use to listen to the market, listen to your customers, and listen to the times and the world. So looking at ethical, what it really means is remaining true to our mission, having global protection, not just in one country, environmental protection, of course, worker protection, which is extremely important, often left out of people's minds. And also in this ethical box is privacy protection and data security, which is becoming increasingly important to the marketplace. And it's definitely a part of ethics. Being accountable means having a very strong management system in place, detailed auditor trainings, rigorous standard covering the entire company, not just one facility here, one facility there, but the entire corporate structure. Downstream responsibility to final disposition. This is so important. I know that Lucia and Paula mentioned how important downstream due diligence is, but it's extremely important. You can't just pass off the waste to someone else and say, don't worry, I've dealt with it. You have to know how it's being dealt with downstream. And performance verification, as we call it. So not only do you do audits, but you have to go beyond audits because anybody can game or cheat an audit. So we have unannounced inspections, and we also use GPS tracking to follow what happens to waste as it goes through a facility. I'll talk a little bit more about GPS tracking later. And then being responsive. This means we have face-to-face meetings. I think we're the only standard that calls together its members in a face-to-face meeting. We have a leadership council. We have regular newsletter and webinars like this one. And anytime customer service, they can get an answer to their questions within hours. And we're always listening. So I want to talk a little bit about something we really pride ourselves in, which is part of the responsiveness, is our community. We have face-to-face meetings. This was a smaller one we held in Colorado, the last one we held, and brings together all the certified companies. These are some of the larger ones that we have in our program. Some of them are well known in Europe, like Kusakowski and WiseTech. Our enterprise partners are another huge part. As I mentioned, when we launched, we came out with enterprise partners. We are proud to say we have this group with us that always prefer to use e-Stewards certified recyclers. And our leadership council is made up of experts from all over the world, from various stakeholder organizations, Samsung, WRFA, many of you know Matthias Schloep, Sony, Vizio, some local governments, some NGOs, some alliances, etc., in our leadership council. And of course, our staff here in Pioneer Square. no longer able to meet in the office due to the coronavirus challenge. But when this is all over, we would love to have you come and meet us in our offices in Seattle. So the new standard, why we created it, the primary goal, a mandate from our Leadership Council, was to make things simpler, more user-friendly. You didn't have to have a graduate degree to understand it, and to streamline some of the additions that have happened over the years, kind of like cleaning out your closet and making it more elegant and easier to use was the primary goal. So the language and the structure were simplified. The ISO 14001 text, which we had based our standard on from the beginning, was removed from the actual text. So we separated them because that made it very difficult to read. You had to go from ISO text to the performance requirements in the same document. We've removed it, but you still are required to meet ISO 14001 to be in the e-stewards. And the ISO structure, the order, is maintained because the auditors are very familiar with that, as are our e-stewards certified recyclers. So as a result of that, it was 2/3 of the original length, which we were very happy about. And another aspect which we are adding is we are going to also have another standard which is going to be required, which is the NAID data security standard, an international standard, probably the top of the line for data security. And that will be effective for all of our members as of 2022. Many of them are already NAID certified. Extremely important because most environmental auditors do not know a darn thing about data security. It's a very different animal, a very different type of requirements, and we believe it's extremely important. So NAID integration by 2022. And some other important changes, we've reduced the prescriptiveness. Some of the procedures are simplified. Less specific documentation requirements. We had so many before. We've just consolidated them. More leeway to satisfy requirements creatively. For example, we removed requirement to inventory and catalog every single small peripheral and circuit board. You can do that in bulk now. And many of the examples that we gave before have been moved to a detailed guidance document, which will be released in 2 months' time, which we're working on now. Other important changes, we have options for developing your own battery testing methodologies. And of course, the Basel Convention decisions, the recent decisions to control trade in dirty and mixed plastics, are in the standard and will be enforced, as will be the Basel Ban Amendment and its entry into force. So people always want to know what it costs, and if you're in a developing country, we can talk about the pricing that we're responsible for, because we have some foundations that we can tap that might be available to help with the costs for those in developing countries. But first we have the get ready costs, and that's the one-time expenses to become compliant with a standard. So you need to download the standard from our eStewards website. It's free now. Take a look at it. Version 4.0 is the most recent version. See what it's going to take, do a gaps analysis to determine how far away you are from being certifiable. And if you're already ISO 14001 and with your data secure, there's going to be minimal costs to get ready. The next fee category is the eStewards license fee. And being a corporate standard, which is not based on the number of facilities, it's a sliding scale based on e-recycling revenue. And to give you just an idea, our average fee per year of our members is $9,240. 60% of our folks are paying less than $5,000 per year. So it is a sliding scale. I can't give you the precise figure, but that scale is online. And then there's the audit costs, which we don't control because this is a third-party audit system. We contract with certifying bodies, registrars that have the auditors that are trained to our standard, and they go out. We have 4 certifying bodies, Perry Johnson, Orion, SAI, or NSF, and they go and can give you an estimate of the cost based on the number of people you have, the number of facilities, etc. And based on the number of audit days, they can give you an estimate. It's a 3-year cycle. There's a full, extensive, comprehensive audit every 3rd year, and in between there are less extensive audits in the second and the 1st and 2nd years. So 2 programs I wanted to highlight. I could highlight many of our programs. We have a program, for example, to work with the autistic community in the labor force of this industry, which is very exciting. That's taking off. But ones that I thought were more interesting, perhaps for the European and global audience, we have a committed designation now that we call it, and it's a way to take e-stewards around the world. We've primarily been in North America. We do have some in other parts of the world, and we want to extend that now. And so we are promoting a new program that gets our larger companies interested in mentoring some of their facilities overseas, getting them ready, committed to be certified, and they will appear on the website as committed. And they're meeting the standards and learning how to do that. It's open to certified e-stewards companies with fully owned facilities in other countries, and they are mentored to conform with our standard, as I mentioned. These also participate in our PV, our performance verification program. So we will do unannounced inspections of these committed facilities and make sure everything is in line. And they have to be fully e-stewards certified within 2 years. So we've had 2 larger companies, Ingram Micro, that are committed to this program, and they're going to be taking it within the next year to these countries to certify their operations there. Another company, WiseTech, which is based in Ireland, is going to be taking our standard to these locations in Ireland and in Thailand. So I mentioned to you about our GPS tracking technology. This was developed with the band side of our operation. So Basel Action Network is an advocacy group which owns the eSteward standard. And we got really good in our advocacy of tracking using GPS devices that are placed into electronic equipment to find out where it really goes in real time anywhere in the world. And it's been extremely successful. You can learn more about our advocacy work at ban.org trash transparency page. And these reports were the result of that technology, the use of that technology. These 2 were done in the United States, where we found Dell computers were going offshore. Many recyclers were named in scam recycling that were US based. We did a report on a company called E-Waste Management that was dumping in Hong Kong, Australian report, a Canadian report, and the most recent one we did was on Europe, and we entitled it Holes in the Circular Economy. And the question might come up with people, is tracking still needed? Are developing countries still at risk? Is your data still at risk from these types of exports? And looking at our system and what we've learned about it, this particular example was part of the European project. This is a German recycler where we dropped off one of the devices, and sure enough, it went here in Thailand. We could follow it with the GPS quite easily into this rural site, which we then went and visited, and I took these photos there of horrific conditions where people were living inside of boxes that the electronics was transported in. Burmese workers that were completely illegal and underpaid, and were living on the site processing the equipment. Here's another location we found with GPS trackers in Thailand, where people are cooking circuit boards to remove the chips. This is another site in Thailand which we discovered with GPS. These sites were popping up all over Southeast Asia because of the national sword policy of China finally being very effective in preventing this trade from going to China. So we have followed this trade with the help of GPS tracking. And as you probably have heard, Thailand did a series of raids on these companies in their territory. So sadly, the answer to that question, is it still needed, is yes. We're still watching electronic waste with GPS tracking going to countries like Pakistan, Vietnam, Indonesia to this day. So we'd also decided to offer this. The more trackers in the field, the better for this industry, we felt. The more accountability, the more transparency. So we're offering this service to many more than just advocacy groups. We have a commercial service which is available to large corporations. It's available to e-stewards, recyclers at a discount if they want to do more than what we normally do with them. Available to companies, governments, academics. And in that program, we do not reveal individual customer information. We just are very happy that people are doing the tracking. And to your subscriptions in the program. We think a lot of the schemes, the EPR schemes in Europe and even the ones that are in the States, in the US and the provinces in Canada can benefit greatly from this type of tracking. It uses customized technology, proprietary real-time user interface. It's based on our 10 years of expertise. And what you get is basically a report every 24 hours of where your device ends up. And you would be shocked. So many of our users are shocked at what they're finding out. So it's been truly a game changer. It's why I wanted to mention it today for the performance verification and conformity of any standards program. So it saves you time, it saves your resources and your reputation, as we said. These are some of our current customers. Samsung and Dell are using it with us. And you can find more about it on the eartheye.org website. So this is our eStewards website. You can go there and learn more, download the standard, and take a look at it, and get in touch with us through that site as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Jim. It was a very interesting presentation, but we also still have some time for a few questions to Jim before we jump into the next presentation about the R2 standard. So I saw in the chat that there are questions for Lucia and Paula, but we will address those during the discussion after the third presentation. But is there a question for Jim that someone wants to ask before we tap into the next presentation? So if you want to speak up, please be reminded to unmute your microphone. You can also type in the chat if you want. Okay, there is one question from Nepal, actually. Is there a certification option available in Nepal?
Yes, so our program is available anywhere in the world. We have not been refused for any reason yet. The caveat, of course, is that the auditors might have to travel a long way, which most of them are not based anywhere near Nepal. But as I mentioned, we have the possibility of tapping into some foundations that are interested in spreading our standard. And so we could ameliorate some of the costs, such as the travel for the auditors. So we could definitely do this standard in Nepal. We find that in developing countries, the most challenging thing oftentimes is record keeping. And so if you're used to that, if you're used to ISO 14001 and the record keeping requirements, then you're ahead of the game. But you are going to be required to keep a lot of documentation of your progress and your systems, processes, and policies. So that is something that we find in the developing world. They're less used to having that need for documentation. very important for any of these international standards. And so that's something we have noted as being the most challenging things at times. The second most challenging thing in developing countries is the fractions of the hazardous fractions. In Europe, they call it depolluting, but the material you have to remove because it is hazardous, many of those fractions are going to have to be exported out of country, out of Nepal, for example, to Europe or North America or Australia. And that's going to require good tracking. It's going to require compliance with the Basel Convention, etc. So those are the biggest challenges we find. But developing countries otherwise, no matter how small the operation, should have no issues other than those that I mentioned.
Okay, so there are other questions in the chat, and I'm taking the one from Heinz now because it fits to what you just mentioned. So he is asking, what are the most dominant decontamination requirements? For example, do capacitor of certain size have to be removed in general, and what about contaminated plastics?
Yeah, so contaminated plastics, those that have brominated flame retardants in them, we uniquely, at least for North America, highlight them and control them differently than other plastics. With the new requirements from the Basel Convention of mixed and dirty plastics, we are now going to control them as being a hazardous waste. We're going further than the Basel Convention. Basel Convention has them in a category called other wastes. We're going to actually forbid the export of that type of material, dirty and mixed plastics, to developing countries. We do have depollution requirements. We don't call them that. That's a European term. But for example, you have to remove the mercury, you have to remove ethylene glycols from the large plasma screens. You have to separate all the circuit boards out and deal with all the hazards very comprehensively. We have a chart in our standard for every hazardous material, what the preferred options are and what are less preferred options, which are allowed at sometimes for things like CRT glass, which is very challenging. So we lay it out there, and I encourage you to take a look at the standard. It's running about 60 pages now. With the guidance document, it'll be much more comprehensive information about best practices. But the standard is there for you to pull down for free.
One last question before we move on from Daniel Hinchliff. He's just wondering if the E-Steward standards is focusing on all types of e-waste or only on ICT?
All types of e-waste. So basically the scope is only excluding things that have flammable gases or liquids, like you can't use a lawnmower that's run by gas, or you can't have a dryer that's run by gas. We have that disqualification, ozone depleting substances as well, but everything else with a circuit or a battery is included in the scope.
Great. We have two more questions there, but I would like to take them then to the discussion after the third presentation because they're more general. So thank you very much, Jim, for your presentation and for answering the question. I would like to hand over to Sean now, who will present to us the R2 standard. Perfect. It seems it's working, Sean.
Okay, thank you. That's great.
See your screen and we can hear you. Perfect.
Perfect. All right. Well, good day, everybody, and thank you for the opportunity to speak today and present you with a high-level overview of R2v3, which is the Sustainable Electronics Reuse and Recycling Standard. And as indicated in the name of the title rather, the V3, we're currently working on and hopefully soon finalizing this third version of the R2 standard. So of course, there's a lot of information in the revised standard that I won't be able to get into today in details. I'm just providing a high-level overview here, but we do have some other resources available online, and I'd be happy to discuss with anybody offline if there's specific questions that they have. So to start, I wanted to give a little background on CIRI, the organization that I work for and that oversees the R2 standard. So SERI stands for Sustainable Electronics Recycling International. It's a nonprofit organization. It's comprised of a multi-stakeholder board of directors that provides the overall strategy and vision for the organization. We also have a staff of 5 that operates or operationalizes this strategy, and that's really managing that standard and certification program. So SERI is accredited by ANSI, which is the American National Standards Institute, and we're as an approved standards developer for the R2 standard. So we manage that standard and the R2 certification program. You can see here also the mission of SERI. It's focused really on reuse and recycling of electronic products in a sustainable manner. And specific focus here is resource preservation, protecting the natural environment, protecting workers and communities as well in which they operate. So in terms of developing the R2 standard, we have another group that we work with that does that, and that's the R2 Technical Advisory Committee, or the TAC. So this is an independent group. It's responsible for review and revision of the standard. So the TAC is comprised of representatives from 3 key stakeholder groups. First, we have the organizations that certify under the standard, so the reuse and recycling operations. Next, we have the customers or users of the R2 facilities, so that can be manufacturers, retailers, extended producer responsibility programs. And then finally, we have the regulatory public interest group, which includes a number of other interested stakeholders, such as regulators, auditors, and consultants. The key here is that within these 3 groups, each of these organizations really has an interest in the standard and works with it in some way. So under our ANSI rules, the R2 standard is required to be reviewed every 5 years. And if necessary, it's updated. And this is really a continuous improvement process. So it ensures the standard stays current and is adequate to address changes within the industry. So the way that the standard is developed, really, once a review process is initiated, the TAC would consider the need for changes to the standard. They identify are there gaps currently in the standard that need to be addressed? Are there things that need to be further clarified to ensure consistency or clarity in implementation or audit? And then the TAC would draft revisions to the standard. So each draft that they make is released for public review and comment. We have a 45-day public comment period that it's posted online. We accept comments back, and then the TAC needs to consider all of those comments that we receive. So we've gone through 2 rounds of public comment already, and working on a final draft now of our standard. And so again, all those changes that we made will be released for public comment. So we do that until there's no further changes that are required to the standard. And then the final draft is ultimately approved by a consensus body, which is a subset of the TAC of voting members. And also then it goes to the SERI board for review and then adoption. So that gives you a brief look at how the standards come to be, but you may be asking, why have the standard at all? And, what does the standard provide? So I like to say that the standard generally provides a solution to problems, and often it's many problems, and they require complex solutions, and so that's why a defined standard can be useful. So if you take, for instance, the challenges associated with managing used electronics, depending on which stakeholder group you're part of, you'll experience different issues or challenges that need to be addressed. And, there's an example here that I've put together, just some general cases, but from a consumer's point of view, when they have used electronics, some of the basic things they want to know is just, what do I do with my old electronics? If they're environmentally conscious, they might have to upgrade a device if it's a computer for work, for instance, because they need it for reliability, but they know their old device still has useful life in it, and they don't want to just get rid of it, send it to the trash, or send it to even recycling. So what can they do with it to, move up that environmental hierarchy? You look then toward the government group, and they have kind of different challenges and different needs. One, they want to ensure that valuable resources in these used electronics are kept out of landfill. They want to ensure that if it's being processed, whether through reuse or through recycling, it's done in a safe manner. It's environmentally sound as well. And so there's also this area of trying to provide opportunities for those that don't have access to the technology. So instead of just focusing on end of life, what do we do about reuse and how do we support that? And now, looking closer to the group here, on the processing side, what are the risks associated with this processing? There's very low barrier to entry in some of these processes, particularly if you're looking at doing a manual dismantling operation. And so it's easy to get into, but we need to ensure that the risks associated with it and the hazards are understood and properly managed. Then you look at, how do I get material? How do you work with those organizations that are providing and generating that material? And of course, how do we ensure that material goes to reuse first, prior to just considering it for end-of-life recycling? So in the case of the R2 standard, the standard really is designed to address all these varying concerns. We have different interested stakeholder groups around the table, and we want to ensure that what we're doing with these used electronics ensures they're managed in a safe, secure, and sustainable manner. So before we even provide that solution with the standard, one of the key aspects of the standard development process that I'm trying to outline here is that through the development, we're able to frame these problems. We're able to develop a common understanding of the issues to work from. And that's really what helps to make the standard work for everybody across the different sectors. So important part of the process, it ensures that the standard is appropriate, it's going to be adequate, and it's going to be effective. So if that's the broad role of a standard, then how can we ensure that, or how can individual organizations benefit, and how can they implement that and recognize the value of that? So this here provides a bit of a summary of some of the benefits and how you maximize the value out of the standard. So first thing I would say is that if you're working outside of any standard, you're really operating in an area of unknown. You don't have anything to compare or to level set your organization to. So that's step number one, is use a standard. When you start to work with a standard, the first benefit or opportunity, which you see here represented in the lower left corner of your screen, this is to manage your risk. So you can do this with the R2 standard currently, even if you're not intending to certify. The standard's posted on the website. You can download a copy, you can review it, you can use it. And so the key is the standard is going to help you identify key risks associated with the operations of electronics reuse and recycling. You need to consider these areas in your operations. Also, regulatory requirements. Where are key areas where regulatory requirements typically apply? You need to assess those. You need to ensure that you have programs, controls in place to ensure compliance with those. And because the standard's built on management systems, so you have to have an environmental management system and a health and safety management system as that foundation. It helps provide the tools for continual improvement. So again, that's a first step, manage risk. If you move beyond kind of that general or basic risk management, you start to derive more value out of the standard. And this next level of opportunity is to use the standard to benchmark your operations. And by this, I mean that the standard provides a summary of industry best practices. That's really what it is. So what that translates into is a common set of expectations for your business, and not just regionally, but globally. While your organization might be small and you may not operate globally, the benefit is that many of your potential customers do. So if you're looking to source equipment for reuse, for instance, phones, computers, say, you're going to want to work with large generators of those material streams, like manufacturers, retailers, distributors, others in the reverse logistics chain. So by meeting those common expectations, the benefit to your organization is that you're gaining access to those valuable markets. So then after that benchmarking, the ultimate opportunity with the standard is to use it to differentiate your business and stand out amongst your competition. And you can do this when you attain your R2 certification. You get a certificate, you get listed on the CIRI website as an approved recycler, you can use it in your advertising and promotions. And because the certification process involves an independent third-party oversight, it provides credibility to your claim. It's not just you saying your organization's doing the right thing, but it's backed up by that independent party of the certification body. So this then provides your customers confidence in your processes, your operations, and just the organization as a whole. And again, since the certification is based on that common set of expectations, the other benefit is customers can recognize the certification and they use that as the basis for their requirements. So when they're looking at somebody that they want to use to process their electronics or to send their material to, they then can build their requirements on top of that. It provides an efficiency. They don't have to confirm all of those requirements themselves on their own. So efficiency for the organization doing it, and also the customer that's looking for that verification. So that's kind of background on the standard itself, some of the opportunities it can provide, but what is the standard itself? What does it come down to in the basis for that standard? So here, this is what, at a high level, we're trying to represent the four main components of the R2 standard. So the first is environmental controls, and that means prioritizing reuse opportunities first. So used electronic devices need to be considered for reuse. That's the most environmentally beneficial, socially beneficial option. And once that's been exhausted, then you look at the most environmentally sound methods to recover those materials, to keep them or get them back into the supply chain. The next area is health and safety controls. So ensuring safe operations for all of your processing, which includes things like your separation of material streams, handling of them, storing of them. Whether you're doing reuse to materials recovery, things like batteries can be an issue because you're dealing with that material and you have to ensure it's handled safely. If you're removing them, how you're storing them, how you're shipping them. So after that, the next big area is data security and sanitization controls. And we want to see here that you have robust controls around both security of the devices for all organizations that are managing them, and then also sanitization for those that are doing that function. So this is important now more than ever because so many electronic devices have data components to them, whether they have storage on them themselves or connection to online or cloud services. It's critical that those be sanitized. And then finally, we want to ensure that devices that go to reuse, as that's prioritized, are properly tested and ensure that they're functioning, help to maximize the life of each of those devices. And then from the processor's point of view, also ensure that or maximize the value of each of those devices. So there's benefit to the recycler in that, there's benefit to the environment in that, but we have to ensure that those devices that we're sending to reuse are actually reusable and verified functioning. So here you can see the structure of the R2v3 standard. You can see the requirements are broken into R2 core requirements on the left, which are applicable to all R2 facilities, and R2 process requirements on the right, which are applicable only to those that perform the operations. So the first thing to note is that once equipment or material goes into the R2 system, it must be handled in accordance with these requirements. However, not every facility needs to perform all the operations. So we recognize diversity of the industry from the point of collection to reusers, resellers, to materials recovery. So this isn't meant to be a one-size-fits-all solution. Instead, an R2 facility can outsource some of those requirements to their qualified downstream vendors. So the benefit there, we have some adaptability in the certification now and how you can be certified, what you can certify to, and it helps address the changing and divergent industry from just being an end-of-life focus. Core requirements cover many of the general things, such as your EHS management system, so the ISO 14001, 45001 for health and safety, developing that core foundation that I indicated earlier for your controls. Requires you to identify legal requirements and ensure that you've got controls in place to track those, demonstrate that you're in compliance with those requirements. And then everything to things like your facility requirements and your transport. So regardless of where you are kind of in the reuse recycling process chain, all of these requirements would apply in some way. And so you would have to identify the requirements, how they apply to you, and demonstrate conformance with those. Then when we look at the process requirements on the right, these are for specialized processes like data sanitization, test and repair. So not every organization is going to be equipped to do these things. If you're doing manual dismantling of electronics for materials recovery, you may have somebody that's already done sanitization up front. If it's, say, phones that have gone through the reuse process, and these are the items that are going for materials recovered because they're not reusable. So that gives you an idea of where and how some of these process requirements would be implemented.
Sorry, Sean, your screen, you stopped sharing your screen or somehow it disappeared. So,
okay, let me just try that again then.
It's coming up again.
Is that going? Okay, great.
Yes.
So in terms then of getting certified to the R2 standard, these are the steps that you would need to go through. So the first step really is conduct a gap analysis. And what that means is get a copy of the standard, you read through each and every single element of that standard. You need to identify where your operations align with those requirements. And then what information or evidence would you use to demonstrate conformance? So if it says you have to identify legal requirements, how do you do that? What's the process you use to identify those requirements? And then what do you use to demonstrate that you've done that you've gone through that process, and that there's a list of applicable requirements, and not just a list of regulations, but what are those specific requirements that apply? So it can be a lot of work, and there can be areas where you find you don't meet the R2 requirements. And so that's the next key step is where you identify a gap that your operations are not currently meeting the requirements. How are you going to do that? What are the controls you need to put in place? And sometimes this is developing new procedures. Then you have to go through and undertake those procedures to build the evidence to demonstrate that they've been done and that you're operating in conformance with those requirements. So gap analysis is a big step. It's the initial step you want to take, and that really is going to define your success through the rest of the certification process. In some cases, organizations would want to use a third party, a consultant, somebody independent to do this. They can be a little more objective. They can also provide other things that you may not see from your own facility, but the key is to do that work up front. Once you're ready for certification, you would choose an independent certification body. So we have about half a dozen, I think, now listed on the website. And the certification bodies act independent of CIRI. Their role is to conduct the audits and determine conformance to the standard. So they would do that in two parts. There's the stage one preparedness audit. Some of this can be done off-site, document record reviews, just confirming that the procedures generally can meet the requirements of the standard. Then you move on to the stage two, which is the actual certification audit. And this is now testing out those procedures in more detail and the control programs. Have what you said you're going to implement, has that been implemented? Has it been effective? Do you have evidence of that? So demonstrating that the operations are in place as they're intended and demonstrating that they meet the requirements of the standard. So certification then, in order to maintain that, once you get it, you have to have an annual surveillance audit, which is reviewing, it's cut back a little bit in timing, reviewing parts of the operation, but definitely the key elements. And then every 3 years, you would undertake then the full recertification audit. So meant to be like the other standards in 14,000 and 45,001 and things like that, a little bit more contained kind of on those surveillance years. So there are a number of resources if you're looking at R2 certification that you can use to help you first understand the standard, some of the background of it, risks, control programs, all those types of things. And so on our website, there's the link. First, I would say, if you're new to this, an introduction to RT training that is offered. Regular webinar has Q&As, and you can sit in there just to understand in a little more detail than today, kind of what the R2 would mean to you. Then there's some more intermediate training modules as you get into implementing some of the procedures or even doing your gap analysis. We have a guidance document and an implementation guide. So those help to explain the standard in a little more detail, each of the requirements, providing some examples around it, how they could be implemented. So good resources to use. And we also have a update newsletter that we issue on a fairly regular basis, and to just provide general information that can assist you. So you might want to sign up for that. And there's also a consultant directory online. These are individuals that have undertaken our R2 lead auditor training. And so they have a fairly good understanding of the standard. They work within the industry and have an understanding of the risks and the proper practices involved with reuse and electronics reuse and recycling as well. So SERI programs, we have programs, or it's a term that we use to describe kind of just a wide variety of activities that are outside of the R2 standard. So they go hand in hand with the standard, but really the intent is to promote sustainable electronics reuse and recycling practices. So no single framework or format for how a program is structured or how it works. The objective is to provide education and support for organizations operating in this space. And then, or those that are just looking to improve operating practices in line with the R2 standard. So very much, organizations in developing countries where they might not have the resources, these are things that we can help to provide as some understanding and resources. Typically, programs that we've looked at have been cooperative projects where we can employ the support of our certification bodies, consultants, sometimes even manufacturers and other recyclers about helping, knowledge sharing, educate the industry. So one of the key areas in particular that we can often provide support is language. And it seems pretty basic, but having auditors, consultants, and resources that are in your native language is such an important aspect, and being able to provide translation to those resources where they're necessary can really help. If English isn't your first language, certainly that's a big benefit to just ease the understanding and the implementation of the requirements. So if we eliminate that barrier, the next real key area is just in education, understanding best practices, and again, consultants, training, trying to ensure that those resources are available within different regions is an important aspect. The last thing I would say is we're always looking for ways to engage and to support new groups and organizations within the electronics reuse and recycling sector. So if you have a need or ideas for support, please reach out to us. And here's a snapshot of where we have currently 925 plus. The number changes regularly, but around 925 R2 certified facilities globally. And you can see there's certified facilities in 33 different countries right now, and numbers do vary depending on region. So definitely some areas where we recognize further work can be done, and we can work with other organizations. So with that, it's a very high-level summary of the R2 v3 standard, some of the opportunities that it can provide companies that operate in the electronics reuse and recycling industry, even those in developing regions. So you see there our website address on the screen. You can visit that for more information. I've also included my email address there, so if you have any other questions or inquiries, you can forward or reach out to me directly. I'd be happy to assist you. And thank you all for your time today, and look forward to the opportunity to hopefully work with some of your organizations in the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sean. I hope you can hear me better now. I got the feedback that my microphone is very quiet, so I hope it improves now. So are there any questions directly for the R2 standards to Sean before we move into the general discussion? Okay, it doesn't seem like it. Yeah, there is one. Someone wants to know which facility is R2 certified in South Africa. Are you allowed to tell us that?
I don't know offhand, just because I am not aware of that, but we have on the website, if you go to that link, there's a full listing. The map is available as well. So you can actually search by region or recycler or processor name R2 facility, and you can find that information. So it's open information that's out there. I just don't know the name right now.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much. Then I would actually have maybe it's rec light. Could it be? Well, we can check on the website, I guess. But yeah. What are actually the precise costs for R2 and also for Senelec? So I would like to open now a bit the discussion in general, because there were also still some questions for the for Lucia and Paula. So could you give us a little idea about the costs, maybe first about R2 and also how a financial support for developing countries, or if there is a financial support for developing countries to introduce the standard. Maybe first, Sean, and then Paula or Lucia, if you could answer.
Okay. The cost to certify is kind of broken into two different areas. There's a licensing fee that's paid to CIRI, which is an annual fee, $2,000 US for an organization, or I believe $1,500 US dollars for a nonprofit organization. There's a discount. And so that's the licensing fee only. The other side of the fees is the audit and certification body fees. And so those, again, you can work with the certification bodies to figure those out. They depend based on size of facility somewhat, because the certification body will provide you a quote on that, how much audit time would be required for them to be on site. And there's a couple of different aspects to it. So R2 requires ISO 14001 certification or an environmental management system, which could be part of the RIOS certification, and also the health and safety, which would be part of that RIOS certification or for ISO 45001. And so you would probably have a few days on those certifications, and then the R2 time on top of that, which again could be a couple days. So, you know, the audit times or costs are typically, I would say, auditor costs around $1,500 per day US. It depends on regional costs. I don't know, you know, those would vary as well, but that kind of gives you a broad idea.
Okay, and do you know of any financial support that is provided to developing countries in order to get certified to R2?
At this point in time, I don't think there's anything specific. That I think would be part of those CIRI programs that I talked about. So, you know, where there's interest, that may be something that we could look into.
Okay, great, thank you. Paula or Lucia, would you also like to answer the question for Senelec?
Paula speaking. Hello?
Yes, we can hear you.
Paula speaking. Okay. So for WILABEX certification, the implementation is a cost that is directly managed between the treatment operator and the consultant, or if the treatment operator has the means to do it by itself. So implementation cost, it will depend of the degree of knowledge, the human resources that the treatment operator have. So this is a cost that I cannot estimate, of course. Then, from the point of view of the audit, we need to consider two types of costs. One is related with the activity of the auditor. So we are not responsible for this. It's a business that is established between the treatment operator and the auditor. We are only responsible to guarantee the quality and the qualification of the auditor, and to guarantee that all the audits are performed against the CNLX standards. So this is an offer that the auditors must provide to the treatment operators to perform the audit. Of course, we define the duration of the audit, and the auditor cannot offer more days that are established in the document. But from the point of view of the organization, and to issue, to manage all the process, and to issue at the end the certificate, and also to maintain our costs as a certification body, we request an application fee. And this application fee is directly connected with the declaration of the intent, the document that I explained that initiates everything. So the application fee is 500 euros, is a one-time fee. So it's not by stream, it's independent of the number of the streams, it's 500. And then we have an annual fee that is, this one is by process streams, so by type of we call it registration fee. This is 500 also. So if you imagine that you are dealing with small appliance and large appliance, and you want to become certificate for both, you need to pay 500 for the application fee, and then 500 for the small appliance and 500 for the larger appliance. So it's 1.5. Okay.
Okay, thank you very much. And are you?
Elizabeth?
Yes.
This is Jim. I just wanted to interject for clarity with respect to costs. When I had given our costs of being 60% of our members are paying less than $5,000 US, that is per corporation, not per facility. And I believe R2 and perhaps Cinelec are based on facility by facility. So if a company has many facilities, they still pay just the one corporate fee.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. That's useful.
May I add, Lucia speaking?
Yes.
About the support for implementation. Yes, so we forum members usually have all the support from the organization to help them by, for example, training and setting up of protocols, and of course they can benefit of all the experience we've gathered in the past years. And maybe I can also explain that in the early stages where the standards were published and we wanted to encourage recyclers to implement the standards, there was a private initiative from we forum members to require the compliance schemes were paying for the costs of the audits and so on. This was, let's say, a voluntary initiative that worked quite well in the initial stages, and then we have seen also a different trend in the later stages. So recently, in some European member states, that are setting up regulations requiring treatment operators to be compliant with the CNLEC or the WILAVEX standard. So that's a different way of supporting, I would say, but it's a way of encouraging the use and the implementation of the standards.
Okay, thank you very much. So I think, I mean, there are costs related to all standards, which might be challenging for, or I'm sure it is challenging for recyclers in developing countries, but at the same time, there are also programs available that are, that can support the process. Samson, you raised your hand. You also, so maybe you can just ask the question that you put in the chat directly. I think that's easier. You're still muted, so just unmute yourself and then you can ask the question. I will unmute you now, Samson, so you can just speak up.
Okay. My question is what I actually typed. Hello?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. So I just wanted to find out from them, the two presenters, just as I put the countries like Ghana, where we already have a lot of pieces of technical guidelines. How does the recycling industry benefit from both and and the other standards? And how does the standard work with local laws? Because sometimes you have some standards that could be really confrontation the local law. How are these standards adaptable to local laws, especially for countries where they already have their standards available?
I can start on that.
Okay.
So Samson, the standards that we're talking about here are largely voluntary. Sinelec may become more legal as it progresses, it seems, and as was reported. But the standards are voluntary, which means they go above the law. They would be kind of silly just to replicate the law. So the law is a floor, and the standard goes above that. And it's very attractive to large enterprise corporations to see companies going beyond the law, that they are required as part of the standard to be completely aware and compliant with all laws, including local, state, national laws. Our standard makes sure that you're compliant with international law as well. So the standard has an opportunity to go beyond just the basic legislation. And in fact, most countries, even the United States, which is a wealthy country, the laws are not properly monitored, implemented, and enforced. With a standard, you have constant contact with auditors, with inspections, performance verification, where the compliance is checked and the accountability is greater, we believe, than just with the law. So those are some of the advantages of having a standard that's voluntary added to the legal framework.
You, Jim, Sean, or Paula, do you also want to add?
Yeah, I can add something on top of that. And I think when you look at standard to standard even, often the intents are the same and what we're trying to drive at. And so if there's specific standards that you're doing regionally or even globally, you can often use that work and those control programs to demonstrate conformance with R2 or other standards. So while these are, as Jim said, they're voluntary programs meant to be above the base minimum legal requirements, you can implement them and use all of these resources that you have, part of your compliance programs, part of your other standards, part of your customer requirements. I mean, these all come together to really develop into one system that manages all of your risks.
Paula, I would like only to say that all the information that is in the standards are available for everyone. So this is not property of one or two. So you can, I advise you to study and to use, because all the standards contains best practicals and useful information. So it's voluntary and it's very useful.
Okay, thank you. Also in the same direction or same regards, there was a question before regarding the acceptance of the standards of regulators and environmental authorities that actually have to control them in the country, and especially then for the Senelec standard, there was the question if you're or if your company is certified to Senelec, would it then be, or what is the probability that you fail an audit by an EU regulator? Is this somehow connected, or can you say something to that?
Okay, regarding this last question, you must you cannot forget that the audit is evaluation in one time, one moment. So we evaluate all the things and tools that were created in the organization to achieve the fulfillment of the requirements. But you must maintain that. If you don't maintain, despite that you pass an audit some month ago or something like that, doesn't mean that you are fulfilling at the time of the legal inspection. If you are not fulfilling and put in place everything, there is no guarantee, because the auditor was there. The auditor make an evaluation of all the tools and the system, and evaluate the records and compare them with the standard. But if you don't maintain that, you are not going to assure that you still fulfill with the requirements. So this is a yes and a no. Is yes if you maintain the fulfillment, the no if you don't provide all the resources to maintain the fulfillment of the requirement. And from the point of view of the acceptance of the legal authorities, I can tell you that there are some countries that Senelec are already mandatory, and there are others that have a good degree of acceptance. Also, as I mentioned before, on discussion in the European Union is the probability to make an implementation act. We don't know yet the degree of this implementation act, if it is for all the requirements of the Senelec standards and all the Senelec standards, or only for important parts, but this is under the discussion.
If I may add to Paula's contribution, and there is one slide in our presentation that explains this. So the WE directive says that we can treat the WE collected in Europe can be treated outside Europe and can be accountable for reaching the WE directive. The thing is that so far no one explained what equivalent means. And in fact, the European Commission is preparing a legal text, an implementing act. That's yes, that's one. That's the one. Thank you. That will explain the criteria for assessing these equivalent conditions. So now there is a preparatory study that will issue some conclusions to help the Commission prepare this implementing act. And of course, it's very likely that Senelec standards may be considered equivalent conditions, but of course, there is nothing written yet. But I suggest that the people in the call stay tuned to this issue just to see what happens in the coming months and what's decided as what equivalent conditions means, because it means that maybe we could outsource treatment in countries outside Europe and and ensure proper treatment and be legally compliant with the WE directive. That's one of the benefits I think we can add to the compliance of the CENELEC standards.
Yeah, the question on the relationship between governments and the standards, it all depends on the government, how they are viewing them. In the US, the EPA is endorsing both R2 and e-stewards as examples of good best practices in management. In some of the US states, they recognize that you need to be either e-stewards or R2 in order to operate as a processor under their legislation. So it varies a lot. And what's happening in the EU, the European Union that was just described, is actually a crossover from a standard becoming legislation. And in my view, once you cross that line, you're in a different arena. You're actually the law, and you're not in the realm of voluntary standards anymore. But every country can do it differently. There's competitive issues, of course, that you need to make sure that the standards you're endorsing are equivalent, that they are, doing what you want to do as a government.
Thank you very much for answering that question. Then I would like to raise the question from Daniel Hinchliff. So he is asking, how much scope is there for bringing in stepwise approaches to meet the standards or to adapt to different country contexts where maybe more manual and informal labor is used and high-tech approaches are less appropriate? It seemed like the e-stewards committed program is a step in this direction. Are there plans to develop auditing capacities in low or middle-income countries? I think it's a question to all of you, actually.
Yeah, I'll jump on that first. We are very careful not to have a double standard where, in some countries that would be less than. We don't think that's even needed. We think in any country in the world you can become e-steward certified. We have accommodation for both manual and automated mechanical dismantling, for example. And indeed, there are challenges, and we're there to help, particularly the initial costs and getting auditors to actually make it to far corners of the world from where our auditors are living. And I mentioned we do have some programs. Right now we have a program in Senegal, for example, where we are subsidizing the costs of a company to become certified in Senegal through the help of a foundation. So we have to get a partner that would be willing to help, but we think we can find that. And the audit capacity will grow as we get more folks in the field. So if, for example, 3 or 4 companies are e-steward certified in Africa, it makes sense to bring on an African auditor, for example. So I think that covers most of the questions.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, Sean, do you want to add?
Yeah, I can add from an R2 perspective, and it's an interesting question because I think this is precisely one of the things that came up maybe halfway through our current standard revision process. And the TAC looked at this and realized that just because of the way that the reuse recycling industry has changed and has transformed so much from just end-of-life processing, it doesn't make sense, and we can't do a one-size-fits-all solution, but it has to be the same standard. And so we have this broad standard, but how it applies to your organization is within that scope, how you would get certified. And so by that, I've referred to the core requirements, the base environment, health, safety, security requirements for all organizations they would have to meet. So an organization that's small can meet core requirements, do some just basic collection and sorting, for instance, and they would verify their downstreams, and all of the rest of those activities could be done through approved downstream vendors. So there's a way to start, And then as they build the capacity, as they build the skills and the knowledge base, they could add on extra activities, extra process requirements that are suitable and appropriate for their organization. So it is a bit of a stepped approach, and also, really trying to focus that audit and that certification on the scope of those operations rather than fit the operations into the standard.
Okay, I can also say that this is our concern also. So one of the things that are currently being developed by the group of experts on the WILABEX organization is a certification for small scale operators. So we want to fit the requirements to the needs of the treatment operators. So this is a concern. We know that the capability of a huge treatment operator is not the same as a small one, and the level of understanding, but despite of that, there is a core requirements that need to be fulfilled. So
okay, thank you for those answers. Maybe we saw in the presentation of R2 that there are already a lot companies certified around the globe, and I don't know what you think about auditor capacities. I mean, this was also part of the question before, because I think that the availability of auditors is often a bottleneck in developing countries also, because you all mentioned that it might be very costly to fly in the auditors to those to the countries to do actually the auditing process. So how did it, do you know, Sean, how did it work for those companies in developing countries that already are R2 certified? And what is your point of view on that? And are there some activities in this direction to increase the auditors' capacities in developing countries?
Yeah, so absolutely. So, and that is one of the goals that CIRI has to work on with our certification bodies, and making sure that we have adequate capacity out there. I mentioned, language being a key factor as well, regional representation. And so that's something that we try to work on, ensure that we have adequate capacity. Those with knowledge of the industry, the key requirements here being, you can have auditors that started off maybe in environment, health and safety, but data security is very different, test and repair as well. So it really depends on the organization and what they're doing. So building auditor capacity is key. Regionally, we do have some of that, and it's a benefit of working with certification bodies that audit to other standards as well. And so quality management systems, for instance, they might have quality auditors, which really are well suited for, say, a test and repair application. So we want to leverage that, ensuring that they've met the necessary training requirements, they have the necessary industry knowledge, and then we can kind of build that capacity where we need to, and ensure that all the regions are appropriately represented.
Thank you. Any addition from Tim or from Paula?
I think I covered it.
I want to say one last thing. Be informed that it's quite possible for you to understand more about the Senelec, and even to become an auditor is possible. So if you have additional needs of information, you can get in touch with us, and we can explain all the process and what can we do for you to increase your knowledge in this field. Okay, thank you very much, and have a nice day.
Thank you, Paula. Indeed, we are already at the end of our time for today's webinar. So I think we covered all the questions that have been posted in the chat. I give you a few or a last chance to speak up again, to have to raise a last question. Otherwise, I would close the call. So is there anyone that still wants to raise a question? So then please speak up now. There is someone use a PC. I don't know who that is, who just unmuted the microphone. I'm not sure if that's a sign that you want to know. Okay, it seems like we covered all the questions. So thank you very much, Paula, Lucia, Jim, and Sean for your presentations. I think it was very interesting. Also, the discussion was very interesting. I hope you all enjoyed the webinar and you learned something. I'm sure all the presenters would be happy to answer any additional question after the webinar also. So I will share with you as usual the presentations as well as the recording of the webinar, so you can have a look again at the slides from the presenters. Thank you very much. Have a very nice rest of the day, and yeah, talk to you soon again. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Elizabeth.
Thank you
Thank
for
you.
organizing
Bye.
this. Thank you. Bye.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye. Thank you.